So I feel like typically we learn about a current event or issue through books or journals or academia, or God forbid you learn about something from the media. But I had the opportunity of learning about the issue of sex trafficking and prostitution from the source. I spent day after day and night after night doing life with amazing individuals who were at various levels of transitioning out of the sex industry. We did life together. We shared meals together. We shopped together. They lived with me. I babysat their kids. We went to court together. We prayed a lot together. I'm actually not sure which we did more, eating or praying. But we ate and prayed a lot. You can be sure of that. They're my friends. And it's out of these experiences with my friends that I'm going to share with you today. See, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an economist. I'm not a physician. I'm really just a glorified friend. So I want to clarify something before I go on that you might get confused about. I'm going to use the words prostitution, sex trafficking, sex slavery, and commercial sexual exploitation interchangeably because I believe that it's referring to the same phenomenon. Now, the preferred term is commercial sexual exploitation. And you know, a lot of people don't agree with me that we're talking about the same phenomenon, and I'm okay with that. But I believe anytime money is exchanged for a human being, that it's considered slavery. See, the auction blocks of the transatlantic slave trade have changed to strip club dance floors and to online classified ads, but it's still slavery because when a person buys sex, they know they are buying a slave. The person that they have bought is no longer a human being. They are only a mouth and body parts. And that slave must do anything that the buyer wants. Anything. I've heard the stories. I've heard lots of stories. Some stories were hilarious. Other stories were really painful. They were painful to tell, painful for me to hear, even more painful to experience. There are stories of rapes, gang rapes, beatings, sexually transmitted illnesses and other related illnesses, acute anxiety, depression, insomnia, flashbacks, emotional numbing, also called flat affect, dissociative disorders, permanent brain damage, and even murder. I'll tell you about one of my friends. I met her when she was 18, and she was working in a brothel. Her name was Imani, and she loved fashion and art and design, and she thought about going to beauty school to become a makeup artist, or maybe design school to design clothing. Imani was also very scared because she was pregnant. And the father of the baby was her pimp. I don't know how long that she was in prostitution, but I know that she conceived her pimp's child when she was still 17, and the pimp was in his late 30s. A few months later after I met her, she had a beautiful baby girl, and then a few months after that, Imani turned 19. This is a picture of Imani at her 19th birthday. A month after this picture was taken, her body was found just a couple blocks from the brothel where I met her. She had been raped, and then her head had been bashed into the concrete over and over and over again until she died. Her murderer has still never been found. Her baby was 5 months old when she died. See, the FBI reports that the average life expectancy for an individual once they enter the sex industry is only 7 years. And another Canadian report on prostitution and pornography said that the mortality rate for individuals in the sex industry is 40 times higher than the national average. Because the experiences of individuals selling their bodies day after day and night after night is beyond horrific. And to survive the horrors of prostitution, individuals employ coping mechanisms. They include drugs and alcohol, dissociation, mental breakdown, self-mutilation, also known as cutting, abortion, and suicide. I believe that commercial sexual exploitation is the great injustice of our generation. Millions of people are bought, sold, and brutally victimized around the world. Like he said, I've worked with people from Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma, Laos, India, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Turkey, and Uganda. I've personally worked with children as young as 4 years old who were sold for sex. And I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because I need you to know that it's real and that something needs to be done about it. And fortunately, we can do something about it, and that's what I want to share with you today. The first thing that I want to share with you about ending commercial sexual exploitation is this. There we go. Prevention begins in the home. The average age of entry into prostitution in the United States is between the ages of 11 and 14 years old. That's the average age of entry. Risk factors for entry into prostitution include poverty, immigration, lack of education, poor education, or educational failure, single parenthood, either they were raised in a single parent home or they are a single parent, conflict at home, parental neglect, time in the foster care system, and a history of childhood sexual abuse. There is a growing epidemic, especially in the United States, of absent fathers, leaving children unprotected, unprovided for, and without leadership. When the father's not in the home, the mother must work long hours, leaving the children with little, if any, supervision. Left unprotected, they are vulnerable to being sexually abused by babysitters, neighbors, and family members. In fact, the leading risk factor for entry into prostitution is a history of childhood sexual abuse. Childhood sexual abuse is so prevalent. In fact, 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before the age of 18. And for boys, it's almost as heartbreaking. It's 1 in 6. Another one of my dear friends, we'll call her Sarah, her father had schizophrenia and her mother was addicted to drugs. So because her father was so unstable, her mother had custody of her. And so while she was in her mother's care, her mother abused her, and her mother also allowed other men and women to abuse her as well. Eventually, when Sarah turned 6, the first time she can remember being sexually abused, she was 4 years old. And I hear that number a lot from my friends. They say the first time they can remember being sexually abused, they were 4 years old. And so what that says to me is, as early as I can remember, I was being sexually abused. So when Sarah turned 6 years old, the social services found out that she was being abused, and they removed her from the home. So for 3 years, she bounced around from group homes, foster homes, and institutions, where she was also abused and molested in those places, until she was 9, when her father finally became stable enough to gain custody of her. And in her father's care, she thrived. She finished 4th grade with flying colors. She enjoyed life with her dad, but when she turned 11, her father died. She went back into the custody of her mother, and her mother had a boyfriend at the time who raped her, brutally raped her. And so Sarah ran away. So at 11 years old, she was sleeping on couches of her friends. She was participating in survival sex. And by the time she was 13 years old, she was fully engaged in prostitution. When I met her, she was 22. She was still in prostitution, and she could not escape this life of exploitation and abuse with which she was so familiar. Today, fortunately, I can share with you that Sarah's left prostitution, and this girl that had only finished 4th grade has graduated from college and works at a rehabilitation facility in Atlanta. She continues to heal and grow every day. You see, children need stable families. Children need parents who love them deeply and who love them well, teaching them true masculinity and femininity, how to make good decisions, how to care for themselves and care for others, how to be kings and queens. All the things that one learns in relationship. Parents actually pass down their identity and inheritance to their children, for good or for bad. When we deal with the deep wounds of individuals who are coming out of prostitution, we spend little, if any, time on the abuse of their pimps, of buyers of sex, also known as Johns, or their boyfriends. Rather, it all goes back to 2 things: mom and dad. Children need families, need parents who are committed to them and who are committed to each other. So like I said, children deeply desire stable families, and pimps and traffickers know this. They often will force their children to call them daddy and will threaten to kick them out of the family if they don't follow the rules. A lot of the young girls I've encountered say, my daddy's not exploiting me. He loves me. He loves me better than anybody's ever loved me in my life. And the heartbreaking reality is that that is the truth. Their pimp loves them better than anybody has ever loved them before in their lives. children who are loved well by their parents are less likely to be victimized by exploiters. So prevention begins at home. The second thing I want to share with you is that rescue is easy. Restoration is hard. Although the media would have you believe otherwise, rescue is relatively easy. The majority of individuals in the sex industry will admit that they never intended to work in a strip club, a brothel, or a pornographic film, and if offered a reasonable alternative, they would take it. However, we desire holistic transformation that goes far beyond just getting somebody off the street. Issues of abuse, trauma, and mental health have shaped their identity and their style of relating. Past judgments have to be addressed through forgiveness and repentance. And this can be an agonizing and scary process. I call it changing their normal. Another one of my friends described being raped every night by her mother's boyfriend for a year when she was just 5 years old. He would give her hard candy so that she would keep quiet while he assaulted her. And when she's telling me this story and she looks me dead in the eye and she goes, "Isn't that messed up?" You see, victims of commercial sexual exploitation have a strong sense of right and wrong. They know the abuse they suffered was wrong, but to them it's normal. They've never known life without it. But I believe that things like truth, love, hope, and light can be found deep within their true selves. As I talk with individuals in the sex industry, I see in their eyes that a fire begins to grow within them and they begin to ache for the glory for which they were originally created. They want more, but they fear that it can never really happen to them. It's so scary, in fact, that many choose to go back to the streets, the life with which they're so familiar, over continuing toward the unknown. I met another one of my friends when she was a streetwalker in Bangkok. She slept with about 4 to 5 men a night and gave all the money back to her family. She also has AIDS. One night when we were talking to her, we went to hug her and she passed out unconscious in the sidewalk. So we took her to the hospital, then we took her back to my room where I sat and watched over her all night. She was dying. Eventually she went to the hospital for 6 days, came back out, and we offered for her to come and work in Nightlight's alternative employment program where we hire women who wanted to leave prostitution to make jewelry. You can purchase this at nightlightinternational.com. I also invited her to come and live with me. But the night that she was supposed to show up, she disappeared. And we couldn't find her for 3 days until I ran into her in the red light district where she was with a client. I was heartbroken and I was angry. And she continued this process of getting sick, coming to Nightlight, getting better, and going back to the streets over and over and over again. Fortunately, she eventually came back to Nightlight and stayed. She's now healthier than ever. She's married, and she's been restored to her family. And she and I are still good friends. But this working with her was an extremely painful process for me. Because for the caregiver, the process of assisting someone out of the sex industry is almost as excruciating as it is for the survivor. Because their needs are legitimate and they are ongoing. And we must remain so aware of our own sin and the grace and mercy that we've received over and over again that we don't grow weary in extending grace and mercy to others over and over again. Restoration is a long and hard journey. The last thing is this. Addressing demand is key. You see, it all boils down to money. Human trafficking is the fastest growing crime in the world, and it ranks second only to drugs as the most lucrative illegal money-making venture in the world because there's such a high demand for commercial sex, and a person can be sold over and over again. Until we decrease demand, more and more victims will continue to be brutally exploited. We tend to believe that issues as profound as this are just a world away and that only a select few can have any impact on it, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. When we purchase pornography, lap dances, sensual massages, or intercourse, we are feeding an industry that will continue to exploit more individuals. We cannot allow ourselves to remain ignorant. It's true, the majority of perpetrators are men. But before women can be fully restored, men must be restored. So people like to say that men are the problem, but I disagree. I believe that men are the solution. Let me explain. One night in Atlanta, I was walking with my team, and we heard a commotion up the hill. And as we got close to her, I saw that there was a young woman laying flat on her back on the ground, and there was a man straddling her, punching her repeatedly in the face over and over and over again. and there were about 15 or 20 men standing around watching, and one man was videotaping. Fortunately, the police showed up shortly thereafter, and everybody dispersed. About 30 minutes later, I found her, and she was so small, and she was so scared, and she was shaking, and she was bleeding, and she just kept saying over and over and over again, "They think they're men. They think they're men because they can beat me up. They don't know what it means to be a man. They think beating me up makes them a man." And what I heard her saying was this: "Why wouldn't anybody fight for me?" How are we defining manhood for the generations to come? Are we going to continue turning our heads from incidences like this, or even what recently happened in Steubenville, and say, well, boys will be boys, or, well, she was probably asking for it? If we remain compliant with this boys' club mentality, women will continue to be treated like trash. See, the world needs men who act as kings. Kings who provide, kings who protect, and kings who lead. The world needs men who reign in a way that blesses everyone around them, rather than men who misuse creation to gratify every impulse. And men, I need you to know today that there's forgiveness for any of the irresponsible actions of your past. We love you, and we need you. I need you, your wife needs you, your daughters need you, and girls like Imani and all the others need you to be kings. Addressing demand is key in ending commercial sexual exploitation. So these 3 points, prevention, intervention and restoration, and addressing demand, could not only eradicate the issue of commercial sexual exploitation, but every one of us can participate in each one of these aspects, and we can start today. We're at a unique moment in our own history. What will the historians write about our generation? See, when I was 10, I read the biography of Harriet Tubman, and I was appalled at the injustice and the abuse and the hatred that happened in my own hometown of Atlanta. Not long after that, I also started reading about the Holocaust through the Diary of Anne Frank and The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. And again, I was overwhelmed by the hatred and the violence. And I looked back on those past generations and I said, why didn't anybody do anything? And I refuse to allow anybody to look back on our generation and ask, why didn't anyone do anything about slavery? Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. This is our chance to leave our mark on history. And we can make a decision today what kind of legacy we want to leave for the generations to come. And listen, just because you weren't fathered or protected or provided for does not give you an excuse to act in a way that is unworthy of your calling. Be a great father. Be a great brother. Be a great husband. Be a king. And for those of us queens out here, there's no shame in being a queen, because we're uniquely created with beauty and life and power that men will never know. So be a great, strong queen. Thank you so much, and War Eagle.